Hello, and welcome back to Sex, Love, and the Self. Last week, I had an inspiring and challenging discussion with a client. She's working through some trauma with her mom, and there's a lot of nuance to it, but to suffice to say, they had a fight. The crux of the issue is that in a past situation, there was a lot of friction. And in order to move forward and heal, the daughter believes that she needs the mother to acknowledge certain behavioral patterns, take responsibility. And the mother is kind of doing that. Mostly, the mother is turning blame around on the daughter and on others and on circumstances. She's also trying to justify her actions and behavior. She's also trying to get her daughter to acknowledge that she isn't a bad mom. And of course, all of this is just human. Mother isn't a bad person. She just perhaps doesn't have the tools to be able to interact with her daughter from an emotional place. But the problem that this is causing is that the two have come to sort of an impasse, and they're unable to move forward in their relationship because neither one of them can really heal from this original incident. Ultimately, it comes down to mother wanting to know that daughter believes she's a good mom, and daughter wanting mother to know that there's room for improvement. And of course, daughter is not without fault, and she's very well aware of that. She's quick to acknowledge her role. In fact, in my opinion, she even is taking a little too much blame sometimes. And the thing is, I'm so familiar with this situation. This rings true and clear to me on so many levels. This brings up so many memories. Mostly, though, these kinds of challenges came up for me in the context of romantic relationships, the ones I had with drinkers specifically. And I don't mean to blame the other person. That's not where I'm going with this. I'm just wanting to give you context about what I was frustrated with when I was having these conversations. I'd say something like, I'm not happy spending most of my time with you when you're either drunk or hungover. And he'd say, I'm a good boyfriend, and this is who I am. If you really love me, you accept me the way I am. I don't have a problem with this, so it's your problem. In not so many words, obviously. And the kicker is, they weren't wrong. Those guys weren't wrong. It is fully my partner's personal choice to be the kind of human they want to be, and it's their choice alone. When I'm not okay, I can share my feelings, I can share my perspective, but if they're happy with their lives and their choices, then it's on me to decide if I want to keep living that way or adjust myself in some way or walk away. The thing is, for a long time, I didn't want to walk away. I wasn't happy, but I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to leave it behind. And in some cases, like that of my client, walking away just flat isn't an option. Being in relationships is tough, period, hard stop. Romantic, familial, platonic, whatever. And when these kinds of challenging conversations come up, when these kinds of difficult situations present themselves, both parties want the other person to understand and validate their perspective, which of course we do. Of course we want that. We want to believe that we are understood by the other people in our lives, by the people that love us, by the people that we love. But the truth is, ultimately, I wanted to change my exes. I did. I had this pervasive idea that if I just found the perfect way to say just the right words, if I could just show the damage that they were doing to me in the perfect way, in the most organic possible way, they'd suddenly have a moment of awakening and they would want to change. As if I could guilt them into changing their behavior, which of course is not something I would ever want to do because of course that's going to build resentment and all kinds of other things. No. And the other thing that intention does is give over all of my power, over my happiness in my own life to them and the choices that they're making. Not useful, entirely disempowering. In any case, eventually, obviously, I walked away from those relationships. But what happens when we can't walk away? What happens when we have these frustrating, difficult, challenging moments with people that are dear to us and so important to us, and it seems like we just can't get to that point of understanding, when it feels like they don't get us, when it feels like we can't move forward because they can't see their role in the situation. And likely, we can't see our role through their eyes, their perspective of our role in the situation. Look, that desire to task our partners somehow with change when we're unhappy is totally human. And there's a million reasons that that could be the case. Perhaps it's in part because there's a part of us that knows that taking responsibility for ourselves and our happiness means that we have to make a decision in this terrible situation that we're in. And if we're going to get anywhere, we have to act on it. And it's probably a decision that we don't particularly want to make. Or we have to find a way to be okay in the relationship and the situation exactly as it is. And of course, our partners will likely react to our sort of charging them with this effort of change with defensiveness. That's how I would react. That's how most of us would react. It feels like an attack on some level. And there's almost an ultimatum involved, like whether we speak it or not. When we come to a partner and say, this or that behavior is making me very unhappy, there's an unspoken element of that implies this decision that we don't want to have to make, that we want them to work with us to fix our happiness in some way. What we're not quite saying is, if you don't make these adjustments, I'm going to have to leave. Or if you don't make these adjustments, we're going to be miserable forever. I am going to be miserable forever. So of course they get defensive. And of course their defensive response is to assert their, quote, rightness, to try to get us to see their perspective, or to try to make it our fault. And sometimes all of those things and more. It's normal, human, at least. I don't want to use the word normal. It's human to react that way, and infuriating when you're trying to work through a relationship issue, as evidenced by my client and her mother. The thing that struck me is that they both continued to talk about how they didn't feel heard at all by the other person. And that was a theme that came up a lot in my relationships with these men in my life that had other priorities. And as I'm looking back now and observing these situations, I'm realizing that I think in all of these cases, we're all just kind of hoping that on some level, the other person will sort of come around. They'll see our perspective, they'll validate it, they'll admit their wrongdoing. Oh God, wouldn't that be nice? And perhaps they'd make a change. And of course, I'm sure a part of all of us knows that that's not gonna happen. And it's sad, it's heavy, because at least in my situations, it feels so desperate to be standing in front of someone you love, pouring your heart out, crying probably, saying, I'm not okay, and I don't know how to be okay in this version of our relationship. And they either say, I don't care, or you're wrong, your feelings are wrong, which of course is wrong. Your feelings, our feelings are always valid, always, period. But we're not going to get them to see it that way. Of course, they're going to defend their rightness, which makes me wonder, in these situations, if both parties could release the desire for our perspectives and feelings to be validated, to be genuinely understood by the other, if we could just acknowledge that neither is going to be able to give or get that full understanding, full validation, perhaps we could actually move past the friction and get what we really do need to heal, which, in my opinion, is usually the acknowledgement and compassion that we were both hurt by the other person, and then move on. The thing is, I think we want so desperately to feel understood because it's a way that we connect. It's a part of being in a human relationship. We want to feel validated. In some measure, we need that. We need to be able to feel connected. If we can never feel understood, it's hard to feel really seen. And if we're never understood, then it's hard to feel like we have a real relationship, because it feels like our partner is interacting with us in this relationship, or is in this relationship with us with just a partial version of ourselves, the version of ourselves that they can see and understand, but without all of the parts that they can't see and understand. So of course we want the safety of that deep connection with those that hold the most intimate places in our lives. And also, do we really need that kind of validation from our relationships? Or have we just been told that that's what it should be? Have we just been spoon-fed an unrealistic expectation? Could we do without that? The being really understood part, I mean. Can we find connection outside of understanding? Because the thing is, as we've talked about before on the podcast, other people are never really going to be able to understand us. They can empathize, sometimes deeply, but deep understanding, and it's because, well, for example, if someone tells me they feel abandoned, I can totally empathize with that. I have felt abandonment, but I'm always going to connect to the idea of abandonment through the filter of my experience with it. I'm only ever going to be able to empathize with that person through my own lens, what abandonment looked and felt like for me. And that's not universal. It just can't be. Which brings us back to that fundamental point that our reality is only wholly true for us. But I don't want us to abandon this effort to get understanding, because that in and of itself is important in relationships. It's essential in life. It's the core of communication. Both are at the core of connection. We have to have understanding and communication in order to be able to connect. But to get complete understanding, that might be asking a little much. That might be pushing us too far. That might be pushing our loved ones too far. So what happens when we feel like we can't really connect to those closest to us because they can't understand us in a particular situation? I mean, I think fundamentally a big part of the answer is we have to let it go. And I think in part, the perspective that we can take that will help us with that is the idea of expectation. Because perhaps sometimes, because of the way we build our relationships, we end up expecting this deep connection from those closest to us in all areas of our lives. We have these sort of unspoken, unexpressed expectations, things that we are maybe expecting that we're not even aware of the fact that we're expecting, particularly in romantic relationships, but it could be true in all kinds. Being truly and deeply understood by the people closest to us might be unsustainable. And I want to call into evidence here some different circumstances, because the thing is, we have these idealized expectations of relationships, but when we really look at our relationships, they maybe aren't that idealistic and perfect, and we maybe have had to drop some expectations. For instance, I share things with my sister that I don't share with my mother, and I share things with my best friends that I would never share with my sister. Why would that be any different with my partner? And it isn't because I'm compartmentalizing my life. I understand those people and the role that they play in my life to the ability that I can, and I get that their belief system may not be a safe place for me to express myself in certain contexts, or their approach to life may not be super supportive of my burning question that I just have to talk out. The thing is, we unwittingly create these expectations of the people in our lives, but the people in our lives are not here to play a role in our lives. They're here for their own lessons and experiences. However, when we're linked by blood or commitment, we impact each other's lives. There's no way around that. And that translates into these expectations, explicit or implied. But that's sometimes where I think we start to lose the relationship, because we burst the bubble around the ideal version of what we want this relationship to be. And that's sad and it sucks. But if we can accept the fact that no one will ever be able to meet all our expectations, we might be able to have healthier relationships with the people that are in our lives, in the way that they can be in our lives, in the place where they can meet us from their life, from their experiences, their goals, their desires, their personal growth path. If we can understand and hold compassion for the reality that no one will ever be able to meet all of our expectations, and not because we're expecting too much, but because for others to play the role that we are imagining or maybe hoping for, they would have to be able to see our world through our eyes, which obviously is impossible. Or we'd have to be able to enumerate and fully explain our reality and expectations to them, which would be like trying to explain the color blue. No matter how simple our desires, on some level, there's probably this unspoken expectation that is actually withholding from us the real beauty of the relationship, the depth of the relationship that we could get to if we could allow these people to play the roles in our lives that they can and want to play, and not cast them as the people that we want them to be. For instance, maybe we want a partner to be a financial participant in our relationship. By itself and on the surface, that is not a big ask. But what if their version of that is selling drugs or robbing banks? Or we want our partner to just participate in our lives. Again, not a big ask. But what if their version of that would mean, pulling up a chair next to our desk at work and hanging out with us all day? Even if we could encounter someone that had the same definitions of our expectations that we do, we would likely still feel failed by those people. In part because even knowing the expectations, they're imperfect beings and they're not going to, quote, perform perfectly all the time. More to the point, we'd feel failed by them because on some level, what we truly want from them is for them to make us feel whole and loved, seen, understood, connected, cared for. And those are things that will only be truly fulfilling if we can give them to ourselves. Because even if someone could wholly and legitimately give us all of those things, we'd always be dependent on that person to give them to us. And when they have to go out and live their own lives, we're going to feel abandoned and like we're lacking something. Not to mention the plain truth that no one can truly love us the way we want to be loved, not in every way and context and moment, not all the time. So why not just let them be who they are, focus on loving ourselves, and accept them into our lives in the way that they present themselves? Of course, it's human for us to want to feel prioritized, appreciated, known, loved, seen, understood, but it's impossible for someone else to do that for us exactly the way that we want them to. And even knowing that cerebrally, it's difficult for us to be able to extract ourselves from the expectation that we have of the relationship. In my case, the expectation that I had of my partners, my romantic partners. In my client's case, the expectation that she may be holding of what a good mother looks like. But like I said, I really think that we could get to happier relationships if we could let go of that a little bit. Or maybe we can parse it out. Instead of hoping that our romantic lovers will understand us deeply, for instance, we can get that from our coworkers or from our very best friends. Maybe we can get that deep connection that we want from a sibling or a parent. Maybe we can feel truly seen by our very best friend. And that's not to say that our partners wouldn't have some measure of all of those things for us. And they will have their own equally authentic vision of us that they do adore, respect, see, love, and understand. So is connection possible outside of understanding? I think the answer is yes. I really do. I think that we can cultivate deep connections if we can let go of the expectations. When we can let go of expectations, we can truly love people for who they really are, the way they can show up in our lives. And we can hold compassion for the reality that we will never fully understand them either. But that doesn't mean that we can't connect, as evidenced by the deep connection I'm crafting with the Pleasure Prince, despite coming from different backgrounds, different countries, speaking different languages. But I'll get into all of that over at Patreon. Join me there at patreon.com/author Jacqueline Linné. If you liked this podcast, please remember to subscribe and join us on Patreon, where you can support the podcast and get the deep dives, the juicy details of my personal experiences in relationships and the ways that I use self-love to create a life I love, to create relationships I love. And if you want to learn how to use self-love to create your best life, check out my website, jacquelinelinné.blog, where you'll find all kinds of resources to support you on that journey. Books, workshops, meditations, personal support programs, all kinds of goodies. That's JACLYNLANAE.blog. Thanks for listening. Ciao for now.